So if wisdom or insight or understanding, especially of interconnectedness, brings us to a kind of natural expression of loving kindness, because how could it be otherwise? We're just responding to a very direct perception of how connected our lives are, how what we do matters, and what others do will ripple out as well. There are also certainly ways of very purposefully experimenting with the qualities of loving kindness and compassion and sympathetic joy, so that I see it almost like stretching. It's an intentional movement outside of the normal way we hold things, to have a greater sense of possibility, actually, in what we do. So everything in that sense rests upon attention. How do we pay attention? What do we pay attention to? Who do we pay attention to? Because that responsiveness of the heart will follow the modulation of the quality of attention. So how do we pay attention? So often our attention clearly is quite fragmented. It's divided. We're having a conversation with somebody, but actually we're thinking about the next 50 emails we need to send, or the person we'd actually rather be talking to than the person we're talking to. We're all over the place. Or, as is typical, our attention flows back to the past, it flows to the future. It could be extremely self-preoccupied. I think of the Dalai Lama's beautiful statement where he said, "I've never met anyone I consider a stranger. I've never met anyone I consider a stranger." And really, if we're honest about how we tend to meet somebody, often we hardly notice them. It's all about me. How do they like me? Do they like me more than they've ever liked anyone ever before? Oh no, they hate me. I said something really stupid. It's awful. Can I get rid of this person? So it's so rare to be quite fully present, and yet that sense of things really is like a gift of love. I can remember a friend many years ago going to Sikkim to visit then the 16th Karmapa. Of course, was an extremely renowned and powerful figure. And my friend came back to India, where we were living, and he said that the Karmapa greeted him as though his arrival was just about the most important thing that had ever happened to the Karmapa in his life. And he did that not through great pomp and circumstance or grandiose flourishes. He did that by paying absolute, complete attention to him. So my friend said the subjective experience of that was one of feeling completely loved. So how do we pay attention? How present are we? How wholehearted are we? Are we really listening? Are we really paying attention in that full way? Clearly, this is a great possibility for us. Sometimes when I'm in a conversation with somebody and I realize I'm not really there, I recognize in many ways it's the same gesture as concentrating in meditation practice, in formal meditation practice. I gather all that scattered, distracted, fragmented energy. I gather it and try to really arrive. So that's what I mean by stretching. We may have a normal habit and we decide, I'm going to see what it's like to do this other thing. It's a great experiment in love, in kindness. And what do we pay attention to? There are, let's say you have the habit of, at the end of the day, kind of looking back at yourself through the day as though to evaluate yourself, like, how did I do today? And let's just say you have the habit of pretty well only remembering the mistake you made, or the thing you didn't say quite right, or the really stupid thing you said at lunch. So much so that your whole sense of who you are and all that you will ever be collapses around that comment you made at lunch in the meeting. The practice of loving kindness is almost like one of asking yourself, anything else happened today? Like anything good, any good within me? Not in a way that's phony and pretentious. It's not like insisting, wasn't it a brilliant and witty thing I said at lunch? Maybe it was really stupid. And there are consequences for that. But that's not all that we are, ever. So we go beyond that, we stretch. Not in a way that's funny, that's in a way that's actually more realistic, because we are not just that comment, that mistake, that error. So we open to pay attention. We look for the good within ourselves. We look for the good within others, even if that good is just the narrowest sliver. Not because we're trying to pretend that's all there is and there's no conflict or there's no turmoil, there's no difficulty, but because when we obsess about, when we fixate on what's wrong, we will naturally feel greater and greater and greater distance and alienation. Whereas if we can find one good thing about someone, we have a sense of a kind of bridge from which vantage point we can honestly and directly look at everything that's wrong, that's not working, that's conflicted, that's turbulent. But it's almost more like a sense of standing side by side rather than having this vast gulf, rather than having them be the other with no connection to ourselves. So this is in Theravada Buddhism, this is a very classic reflection, to look for the good in someone. And I first started practicing it directly when I was in Burma. I went to Burma in 1985 to do intensive loving-kindness practice, and this was part of the early instruction. Think of different people in your life, different relationships, and see if you can find like even a little bit of good in them, even someone you don't like, even a difficult person or an enemy. So my very first thought was, I'm not going to do that. I thought, that's what stupid people do. They go around looking for the good in everybody. I don't even like people like that. But as I tell the story, I was very far from home. I was in a Burmese monastery. And the nature of the teacher-student relationship in a very traditional culture like that is not one where the teacher suggests you do something, you say, I don't feel like it, or show me why I have to. It's like you do it. And so I tried it. And it was actually quite remarkable. It worked in exactly the way it was said to work. Not that I got all stupid and confused and couldn't tell right from wrong, but it was just different in terms of my sense of a connection to somebody. I even thought of somebody whose actions I really didn't like. I found him really quite obnoxious, a person. I think very reasonably so. And then I had this memory. I remembered once having seen him do this extraordinarily generous and kind action toward a person we both knew. And he did it in the best possible way so that this person didn't feel like pitied or condescended to. It was just really well done, very gracious, very graciously done. And that memory came back to me. And then I thought, I don't want to think about that. That complicates things. It's easier when I can put him in that you're a mess category and, you're always awful kind of category. But it's not so, is it? Life is complicated. Beings are complicated. We're complicated. We're intricate, changing, flowing, with so much capacity for generosity and love and goodness. And so often beset by ignorance, confusion, delusion. So we look for the good. It's a stretch. And sometimes when realistically we are not going to find anything that we can rest our attention on, we do that other reflection that all beings do want to be happy. this is what we want, that when we look at even the most terrible kind of action, somewhere in there, in some twisted, distorted sort of form, we find an urge toward happiness, toward belonging, toward being a part of something greater than our limited sense of self. We find that there, we share that. So we take the time, we bother to reflect. All beings want to be happy. And then a big question is, who do we pay attention to? Who do we ignore? Who do we overlook? Who do we look right through? Who has become the other, not even through prejudice or bias or antipathy, but just indifference? Think about all those people who play a role in our lives of some kind that we just look right through. I have a friend who just wrote a book, and he used to live, I live in Massachusetts, but I have a little sublet apartment in New York City, and he used to live in that very same neighborhood in Manhattan. He's since moved, but in his book he talked about going into a corner store, so I knew exactly which one because it was the same corner, that I walk by and sometimes go in the store. So he talked about going into the corner store and having that kind of reaction to the woman who's often working there, like she was an object. He said that he realized that as far as he was concerned, she could have been a cash register with arms, which I thought was a great phrase. And one day in this kind of effort, he decided to actually pay attention to her. And he said beforehand he found her like not exactly neutral, sort of grumpy, or, like he was a little bit disdainful toward her as well. So he said he decided to pay actual more complete attention to her, to include her rather than exclude her and like, hurry up, And he said he realized that she was kind of humming or singing along to this song that was playing on the radio, and that she had an absolutely beautiful voice, just stunning. And so he told her, he said, you have a really beautiful voice. And he said she lit up. She just beamed at him, like so radiant. So I went into the store one day, having read this, and I thought, I can't wait to tell her, I've heard you have a really beautiful voice. I didn't think I should say I read it, but I figured I could say, I've heard. So I was all ready to go in and say, I've heard you have a really beautiful voice and watch her beam and light up and come alive for me. But I went in and she was already beaming and smiling. She was happy anyway. It had nothing to do with me. And I realized how I probably wouldn't even have noticed that if I had been more in the state he was describing originally, which is so common to us, like a cash register with arms, like a thing, not a person, not a creature with feelings. And so this is how the world comes alive for us, is by paying attention instead of sleepwalking and not noticing and objectifying all of these many forms of life, these beings that we encounter. So what happens if we actually make the effort to include rather than exclude? To listen, to look, to consider, to pay attention. That's actually the literal practice of loving kindness. Part of what I find people often have quite a bit of difficulty with is the idea of kind of pumping up an emotion or maybe covering over what you might actually be feeling, which could be conflicted and difficult, complicated, just covering that over with this little veneer of sweetness, which would be kind of appalling, wouldn't it? Yeah, there we are. Many, many years ago, I was reading Time or Newsweek, and there was an interview with this former beauty queen, Miss Kentucky, of 40s or 50s or something like that. So this was many years after her reign. And they asked her what she had to say about life, and what she said was, I'm so tired. I'm so tired of smiling. You think about that, like 40 or 50 years of just smiling for the camera, awful, really, just disconnected, completely disconnected from what might actually be going on within. And that is the kind of fear or squeamishness people often have about loving kindness practice. I teach an intensive loving kindness retreat every winter at my own center, the Insight Meditation Society. And I remember one year somebody came up to me in the beginning. He must have been there to please somebody, because what he said to me was, "I hate this practice." He said, "I just detest loving kindness practice because it reminds me of a continually enforced Valentine's Day. Like on the count of 3, you'll be filled with love." Something really phony and coercive. But I'm happy to report that by the end of the retreat, he was feeling very differently about it. Because it can seem so utterly strange and phony and pretentious, hypocritical, all of those things. But I like to think of it, instead of course, any of those things, as a kind of experiment. What's it like to step out of those ruts of attention? What's it like to include instead of exclude? What's it like to look at the good instead of just being fixated on our grievances and what's wrong with us, what's wrong with everyone else in the world? What's it like? What happens? What happens if I actually pay attention to that supermarket clerk? What happens if I speak to people in the elevator in New York City? Not first, of course, but I mean respond. I would never speak first. But sometimes other people talk. Like, what do you do? I grew up in New York City. I often talk about being in the elevator and my sublet. I grew up there where, of course, the code is, you get into the elevator, you don't look at anybody, you don't smile, you spin around and you stare at the door. Or maybe you're lucky and there are lights, numbers lighting up to look at, keep you distracted. But every once in a while, someone strikes up a conversation. And my sort of immediate visceral response is, "What do you want?" Because that's how I grew up, right? But what's it like? What happens if you pay attention, if you talk to somebody, if you listen? That way, all of our lives, every day, becomes this incredible creative medium where we realize, I don't have to be the way I was yesterday. This is a really big tableau. This is a big life in which I can create and recreate these responses. I can experiment. I can step outside of the narrow confines of the things I'm used to. I can dare to imagine different kinds of happiness. It's a lot of fun when you see it in that light. So in my tradition, the way that's done, the way attention is modulated and played with, is through the silent repetition of certain phrases, where the phrases are like the vehicle for attention so that it can be less fragmented, less distracted, much more comprehensive, more gathered. It can be even wildly experimental as we pay attention in different ways, wishing ourselves well, wishing well toward others, as we go through different, you could say, categories of relationship, those whom we love anyway, those whom we hardly know, like the checkout person in the supermarket, those we have difficulty with. And we really play. We use the phrases as the extension of our attention to see what happens, rather than seeing yourself as trying to fabricate something you actually are not feeling. You can utilize those phrases in just that way. Now, I often say that because they are words, clearly the phrases are going to be less than perfect, but we use them because that's the conduit for our heart's energy, for that quality of attention. We settle on a certain set of phrases that do express some kind of wish for ourselves and for others. The practice of loving kindness is most likened to a practice of generosity. It's like generosity of the spirit. And like any practice of generosity, the motivation is going to be really very important. Do we offer loving kindness, as I said yesterday, really almost as a kind of attachment? Like, may you be happy. Well, let's see, I've only got until 1 o'clock today, so may you be happy right away so I could fit in someone else tonight. Or may you be happy in this precise way. Or can it be like a freely given gift? I remember years ago, it was actually the year that I went with a group of people to India and Nepal and met Tuka Urgyen Rinpoche for the first time. Along the way, we had gone through India and seen various teachers and gurus as we made our way up to Nepal. And one of the people in that trip was this young man. And when we came back to the States, at one point he said to me, I'm thinking about bringing my father to India and going to this one particular city and having him meet this one guru there. And he said to me, what do you think? And I thought about it, and then I said, I don't think that's such a good idea. India has so many extraordinarily beautiful places, and that town is not one of them. And he probably won't like it. And the season you want to go is going to be really hot, and he may hate the food. His father had never done anything like that before. I said, he'll probably hate the food, and he could get sick, of course, and there'll be bugs. And not only that, you really have to admit, the scene around that guru is a little intense for someone who's, completely unused to that sort of thing. I said, it'll probably strike him as really strange, and I don't think you should go. But he didn't listen to me, and he went anyway. And then I saw him sometime later, and I said, how was it? And he said, it was the best thing I've ever done in my entire life. My father loved India. He loved everything about India. He loved the food. He loved the city. And not only that, he loved the guru. He loved the scene around the guru. And not only that, he decided to become a disciple of the guru. And not only that, he's decided to spend the entire rest of his life devoted to the guru's mission. And I thought, I could not have been more wrong. But what is the most important thing in that moment? My feeling about shouldn't have worked out, really? Or the fact that they were happy, right? What's real generosity in that moment? So what do we actually want? Can our offering of kindness be a freely given gift without all those strings and expectations and demands, and you better listen, and you better have a wretched time in India because I predicted that, or, you should do this, do that. That's what's possible for us, is for loving kindness and compassion to be a kind of freely given gift. That's what we practice for. We also practice, in a way, it's like immersing ourselves in the terrain of loving kindness and compassion. And along the way, we see a lot of things. We see attachment. We see grief. We see that state of overwhelm. We see despair. We see the ways we feel we have nothing to give. We have nothing to contribute. We see so many things, and that's part of what makes that practice very rich and very real. Instead of just being like Ms. Kentucky, this kind of superficial overlay of a very phony smile, it's a powerful exploration of that terrain. So we go through all kinds of different things. And even though we may not literally, in an analytical way, be asking ourselves these questions, we confront. Where's the balance between loving kindness for ourselves and loving kindness for others? What does it mean to have tremendous compassion for someone and to realize I cannot fix it? I can't make it so. in some way. What does it mean? Where are those boundaries? What does true generosity look like in this moment, in this context, in this time? So that's the terrain that we enter. There's a lot that unfolds, even as we use simple tools like the repetition of the phrases through an extension of different categories of beings. A tremendous amount will come up and be revealed and challenging us in all kinds of different things, which makes it an actual practice. Part of what we come to recognize, I think, is the sheer power of a quality like loving kindness and compassion. Because that's another problem that we have, just often culturally or collectively, is the sense that those qualities are sort of weak and compromised. You know, and if you can't really do anything about something, well, you feel a little bad about it. You know, that's compassion. Or, you know, it's a very big miss in terms of the actual power of these qualities of the heart. One of the books I wrote was called The Force of Kindness, and it was a title that publisher had suggested, and I loved the title because I thought it was very provocative. Because so much of the time we can think of kindness as a sort of secondary virtue. No, it's like if you can't be brilliant and you can't be courageous and you can't be wonderful, it's like, okay, be kind, you know, it's like nice. It's not exciting or anything, but it's a nice thing. It goes in the virtue column. Not high, but, you know, it's in the column. And yet, actually, one of the things I'm very touched by in Tibetan tradition is very often if someone is referring to their own teacher, the thing they say is, he or she was very kind to me. Before they'll say they were a scholar of enormous prestige, or they had this or that ability, or they, even before, you know, they had amazing realization. It's like, they were kind to me. Because when we actually experience someone's kindness, it is an enormous and beautiful gift. And I don't think any of us look back at those people and think, oh, poor person, you know, sort of foolishly going around being kind. It's something we have tremendous gratitude for, because that is life-changing. And just as we receive it, we can extend it. And so that's part of the exploration too. What is the energy and the vitality and the strength of these qualities of the heart? And so the methods tend to be very, very simple, but not easy, as usual. The silent repetition of certain phrases, guiding the quality of attention, and playing. We offer loving kindness to ourselves. We offer loving kindness to those who've helped us. We offer loving kindness to all kinds of different beings, ending in the extension of loving kindness to all beings everywhere, to all of life. So let's